Dear Professor Stevan Weine, thank you for joining us today. And can we start by talking about your project at the Illinois University? So what are the main goals of the project, and in which countries you are observing the reintegration and rehabilitation processes? And what are the first achievements of the project? Thank you.
Okay. We have a Center for Global Health at the University of Illinois at Chicago College of Medicine, where I am a professor of psychiatry. And within that center, we have a program on global mental health. And that's the program within which we're doing this work on rehabilitation and reintegration. And I have had the opportunity to work in a number of different countries on this issue, most intensively Kazakhstan, but as well, I visited many countries and engaged with folks in other Central Asian countries, such as Tajikistan, in European countries, including especially Kosovo in Southeast Europe, and in countries in other parts of the world, such as Jordan. And the goal, so in all these places, but our goals is to try to understand how this is going. Many countries around the world have citizens who ended up going to Syria and Iraq and have returned, adults and children. And it's a big challenge. It's a big undertaking for these countries. And so we want to try to help them to understand how that's going. Is it working well for the women and children, men sometimes, for the communities, for the service providers that are involved, and we're involved in training and capacity building to help increase the ability of those countries, governments, non-governmental organizations, service providers to be supportive so that this undertaking can succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as we know, rehabilitation and integration are the very long-term processes, very difficult, right? And countries, they have started these processes and they are learning every day and from each other, and they are just building new things just to come over the difficulties. And what are the first observations that you've found visiting these countries, including Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan? So since the first group of returnees arrived, I think almost 3 years passed, and what they achieved during these 3 years, and what are the main problems, main outcomes, and best practices?
Okay. Well, I think that the really big takeaway from this work is that it can succeed. That we see women and children who have come back to their country and been welcomed and reintegrated into life there. What does that mean? That means that they joined with their families and live together, or maybe separately in some cases. The women get jobs or get trained in a new field and then get a job. For example, some women have opened salons, other women are in the food services work. And then, of course, children have gone back to school. This is, for me, the most important. So the children are in school and learning and have friends and have restarted their lives. a place like Kazakhstan, you know, and I think in other places as well, there's concern about will they be welcomed by people in the community. And there's often a lot of negative feelings there. And sometimes that's in the media. And so it's important not just to work with the individual, but also to work with the community to help them to understand that these people really should be seen as victims of terrorism themselves and deserve the support of the government and of the community to help to restart their lives. But that's not easy, and sometimes that work can be challenging because these attitudes, these negative attitudes, can be very strong, and sometimes the media pushes these stories about how dangerous these people are. I think that when it comes to challenges, we recognize that some children and mothers have special needs. So one of the big challenges is around mental health issues. So we're talking about children and mothers who are exposed to a lot of violence and a lot of trauma that comes from multiple sources. It can be things that they experienced in Syria, like atrocities that they had to witness, such as torture or killings. It could have been during the period of war or displacement in Syria. And sometimes these women come from family backgrounds where they were exposed to violence in their own families. And that's part of the reason that they went to Syria in the first place. So these things need to be addressed properly. In many countries, we have specific kinds of practices in mental health to help support women and children, but not all countries know about this kind of work. So one of the challenges is to make sure that mental health professionals and other people like teachers or faith leaders understand how to help people who are bothered by these things like nightmares, strong memories, fear, difficulty concentrating. And you can imagine that that's especially challenging for children because it would interfere in their ability to be in school and to have friends and to learn. So this is one major challenge, this area of coping with the mental health impacts of trauma. Another challenge is that some of these children were out of school for several years, or they were not in an adequate school. And also, because of the life that they lived in Syria, they might have been injured. Some children were starving, some had medical diseases, and these things impacted their development. So some children are what we call developmentally delayed, and they need help. They need special support and help to be able to catch up with other children their age. So sometimes, you might have a child who is 12 years old, but they haven't been in school since they were really 7 years old. And so schools have to be able to offer them special individualized services to help support them and help them to catch up with their peers.
Thank you very much, Professor Weine. My next question is about practitioners on the ground. So I know that you are visiting these countries and you are meeting with them, you're organizing trainings. So my question is, we also conducting research, and when we talk to local specialists, it seems that they have now many problems. At the beginning, there was enthusiasm, support from the government. Now they are running out from the even financial resources. So there are so many shortage when it comes to the both skills and also human and financial resources, I think. Do you observe, do you have some kind of the same feeling, same observations? And what kind of problems you would highlight in terms of practitioners' work they are need?
Okay, that's a good question. I think the first thing I want to highlight is that this work should be seen as a long-term project with multiple different phases. And each of these phases calls for different levels of support from practitioners. And we actually have been, part of our group has been doing some writing and research on these issues. And we actually said that we shouldn't think of this as our rehabilitation, reintegration, 2 R's. There's actually 5 R's. And I'll say what they are briefly, and because this will help to answer your question about practitioners. So the first is repatriation and resettlement. You know, that means physically bringing these people back to their country and legally giving them status and helping them to address their immediate needs, whatever those might be, to restart their lives. And then reintegration is the next phase. And this is like what we do with refugees or migrants or trafficking survivors, to help them to go back to school, to go back to work, to get housing, to put in place all the different components of their life they need to survive. And then there's rehabilitation, which for us means helping them to grow in ways that will make sure that they don't become involved in any kind of violent or criminal activity. This can involve things like education or cultural orientation, and different kinds of learning that can help, especially people who have been taught to believe, say, in a version of religion, which is not true, and which spreads violence. And then the last I would call resilience, which is to strengthen their capacities as individuals and as part of families and communities to be able to handle adversity and challenges. So all of these phases, five different phases, are important and necessary. I think that sometimes governments think that all we have to do is the reintegration part or the repatriation part, which is just to kind of get them back to their country, get them a job and a place to live, and then everything will take care of itself. And and I think those parts of the work are very important. So I think I was saying it's important that that governments and practitioners think about all of these phases, which is going to take time. This work is not just about getting them a job and housing and then they're on their own. And so that means that practitioners need support and training for all phases of these work. I think that I'm overall very impressed by the practitioners who've been engaged in this kind of work, but I agree with you that they're under a lot of demands, a lot of pressure, and I think they deserve our thanks for what they do, but they also they have needs, and those needs need to be addressed. If you're asking them to do this kind of work, it should be supported adequately, and they need training and supervision from experts for areas that are new to them. This is one place that people from the international community, like myself and others, can be of help. I think that practitioners also need to be part of a community of practice where they can share information with one another about what's worked and what hasn't worked. And part of the job of the government is to help to support these communities of practice. I have heard examples where, you know, practitioners in one side in one city are working, and then you know, a couple hundred miles away there are other practitioners who are doing the same kind of work, and yet they have never spoken with one another or shared their experiences with one another. This is the kind of thing that I mean could be helpful. And then I also think that Kazakhstan, for one, has, you know, overall had really good success in their program and learned a lot of lessons. And so I think that there's a great opportunity to share information between countries. And one of the things that I would like to see from Kazakhstan and from other countries is that there be more work done in the space of what we would call monitoring and evaluation, so that there was, you know, actually, you know, rigorous evidence that showed what worked and what didn't work, that tracked the outcomes of these programs. This shouldn't be just a matter of somebody's opinion. This should be objective evidence, which shows what's working, what's not working. And this can be a very important basis for the kinds of training and exchange between practitioners that I'm talking about. Thank you.
So, Professor, in which countries you are working? I mean, you are learning the experiences of which countries, and could you compare the rehabilitation and reintegration processes in which countries and highlight good practices?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the country where I'm working most intensively is Kazakhstan. Other countries are countries that I have visited and consulted in, but I am not doing ongoing work in. So what I'm going to say is that there's really no other country like Kazakhstan that has done this on such a scale, as far as I know, that has returned so many people and committed wholeheartedly to this program. Other countries such as Kosovo or Northern Macedonia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, I know about, have brought back smaller numbers of people and are supporting them. But I don't think they're as far along in the process as Kazakhstan has, nor are the numbers as large. I think that all of the countries where that I'm familiar with are applying some of the same best practices, and that's good. I think that they have there's been a strong international dialogue on these issues. There are a number of different guidances out there from international organizations about how to do R&R, rehabilitation and reintegration. We've actually reviewed all of those, and we've spoken with the practitioners in many of these countries. And, I want to return to what I said earlier, that I think that it's really not adequate to think of this work as just R&R. I really think that this 5R model, repatriation, resettlement, reintegration, rehabilitation, and resilience is a better way to think about. It's a more accurate way to reflect on this work. And when we talk to people in different countries, we try to understand which kinds of resources, which kinds of practitioners are being devoted to each of those different kinds of areas. And what we see is that different countries have made different choices about how to do that, about who's doing what and where, but that most of them are doing the same kinds of things. What are the big themes here? The big themes are respect for human rights, to be sensitive to gender issues, and to developmental issues, especially with children. Another big theme is whole of society, that this work must involve multiple different sectors, from health and mental health to education, schools, work and labor, security, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, sports, culture. So it really, takes a whole of society approach. And then another big cross-cutting theme is trauma-informed practices, as I said. So the countries that are doing it right are following these kinds of guidances, but they're doing it in their own way, in the sense that it's tailored to fit the culture and the context where they are. I think that the challenge that poses is that you have to bring together a lot of different people and practitioners from a lot of different sectors. You have to keep them engaged in the work for multiple years. And this is not an easy undertaking. But I think the first thing, again, we should recognize is that it's doable. And because, there are some countries that are not taking back their citizens because they say this can't be done. Well, I think let's acknowledge that it is doable, and that we have the practices, we have the expertise in most countries to be able to do this. And where we don't, we can help to, supplement that through sharing with other countries, through training and capacity building. And then let's recognize that it takes time, that this is not a 6-month project. This is not a 1-year project. This is a long-term project. But I think it's a worthy investment. And I think the countries that I've been to would recognize what I just said and agree that this is a very worthwhile thing to do, and certainly better than the alternative of leaving persons to stay in a horrible refugee camp situation in Syria.
Mhm. Thank you very much. Let's continue our conversation about Kazakhstan. So in Kazakhstan, as you know, there is a strong ideological pillar of the rehabilitation process. They call this ideological part, and they mobilized theologians to work with returnees. So what do you think about this ideological part, de-radicalization process? So do you think it's can be effective, or do you think that, because some experts, they just ignore this part, they say that it's not necessary to de-radicalize, to have this ideological religious part of this process? And also about Kazakhstan, do you think that Kazakhstan somehow missing this mental and trauma focused part, and also gender sensitive approach? I think these two things, gender and trauma, mental health, is somehow missing, or it's there, but it's not strong, but ideological part is very strong.
Uh-huh. Well, I'll speak to the gender and trauma part first. I think that I see a lot of strengths in the gender focused work. I think we're talking mostly about women, mothers who are raising children, and I think that there's very good support for them and good sense of how to empower them as independent people to continue to raise their children and build a family and to be employed and all of that. So I see strengths there. I think that there were gaps in the trauma area, because I think that there is not a tradition of trauma-informed practices in this part of the world. And so many practitioners were not familiar with the notion of post-traumatic stress disorder, or how, you know, trauma impacts children, child development, families, mothers. And so we and others have done a lot of training in this area, and people are really eager to learn about it, and I've seen them incorporate that into their practices. And so you know, we're feeling like they're doing okay in that area through the support of people like myself and other internationals, like Dr. Heidi Ellis from Harvard, for example. In the area of ideology, I think this is complicated and maybe a little bit controversial. They have theologians who work with these women. Some of them are also psychologists. And we've talked with many of those people, and I have a sense of the kind of work that they do and how they do it. And I think that I'm impressed by what many of them do, which is more than just ideology. It's really helping the whole person to kind of like reintroduce themselves to themselves and to society. These are often people who were kind of brainwashed by others, or let themselves get brainwashed by what they read in the media, or what their husbands told them, or what a recruiter was telling them. And so they need some kinds of re-education to learn properly who they are and how they can be a strong and supportive mother. And so I think theologians can do that job well. One of the things, I think one of the underlying themes that we have really come to understand is that ideology is important, but it's not just ideology. It's where ideology meets the rest of the person. So, so we have people who let's say, were vulnerable to ideology because they didn't know who they are. They didn't understand their roles and responsibilities in their society. They didn't properly understand religion. They didn't understand right and wrong. And so, and part of, sometimes that's because of the violence and trauma that they were exposed to in their families, or coming from a broken family, or a family that was ruined by, say, alcoholism. They didn't get this kind of basis. And so they need the support of professionals to help them. I think it's not just ideology, it's the whole person. And so I think when this works best is when a team that includes psychologists, it includes teachers, it includes theologians and others, all works together to try to support the whole person and help the whole person to develop. I think when I have concerns when we just look at ideology and we don't look at any other aspects of the person, then I think we could end up on the wrong track. But mostly I think that this is going pretty well.